He was the king of a tech empire, standing under a canopy of 1,000 white roses, ready to marry his new perfect bride. She was his ex-wife, the woman who had sacrificed everything for his dream, now forced to serve drinks at his wedding in a cheap polyester uniform. When he saw her, he didn't see the woman who'd held him when he had nothing. He saw a ghost he needed to exorcise. With a smirk that dripped with cruelty, he called out for all his wealthy guests to hear, mocking her as a common maid. He thought he had finally broken her. He had no idea he had just ignited a fire that would burn his entire world to the ground. The late afternoon sun, a shade of molten gold, filtered through the grand glass atrium of the Oak Haven Grand Manor. It was the kind of light that made diamonds sparkle brighter and champagne flutes gleam with an almost holy luminescence. This was the wedding of the year, a meticulously curated spectacle of wealth and power. Richard Beaumont, the 36-year-old CEO of Beaumont Innovations, a man who had clawed his way from a two-bedroom apartment to the cover of Forbes, was marrying Isabella Thorne, a socialite whose lineage was as flawless as her porcelain skin. Every detail screamed opulence. A string quartet played softly near a fountain sculpted from Italian marble. Waitstaff in crisp black and white uniforms moved like silent phantoms, their silver trays laden with canapes topped with caviar and gold leaf. Among them, almost invisible, was Eleanor Sutton. Her uniform wasn't the bespoke tuxedo of the manor's staff. It was a simple, ill-fitting black dress with a starchy white apron provided by the third-party catering service she'd found on a job board. The polyester fabric chafed against her skin, a constant, irritating reminder of her current station. Just 6 months ago, she had been Eleanor Beaumont, mistress of a penthouse overlooking the city, a woman who chose fabrics like silk and cashmere. Now she was Eleanor Sutton again, anonymous, struggling, and serving hors d'oeuvres at her own ex-husband's wedding. She hadn't wanted the job. When the agency assigned her the Oak Haven Manor gig, her blood had run cold. But rent was due, her car needed repairs, and pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Richard had made sure of that. Their divorce had been brutal. His high-priced lawyers had painted her as a gold digger, conveniently erasing the 10 years she had spent supporting him, working 2 jobs so he could code his first app, selling her late father's cherished watch to fund his first server purchase. They had argued that her contributions were emotional, not financial, and the judge had agreed. He kept the empire. She was left with a pittance that vanished within months after paying her own legal fees. Her strategy today was simple. Keep her head down, her eyes on the floor, and be a ghost. No one would recognize her. She looked different now. The stress had stolen the weight from her face, leaving shadows under her eyes. She wore her mousy brown hair pulled back in a severe bun, a far cry from the soft waves Richard used to love. For 2 hours, the plan worked. She was just another face in the blur of service. She refilled glasses, cleared plates, and endured the condescending glances of guests who saw not a person, but a function. The pain was a dull, constant ache in her chest, a phantom limb where her old life used to be. Then the moment she dreaded arrived. Richard and his new bride, Isabella, were making their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations. Richard was a vision of success in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He exuded an aura of untouchable confidence, his laugh loud and performative. Isabella clung to his arm, a diamond necklace the size of a robin's egg glittering at her throat. Eleanor was near the Grand Oak bar, replacing an empty bottle of champagne when she heard his voice, closer than she expected. "And the deal with the Tokyo Consortium closes next week. It's a game changer," Richard boasted to a circle of fawning businessmen. Eleanor froze, her back to him. "Don't turn around, just walk away." But her feet felt cemented to the floor. She could feel the heat of his presence, the familiar scent of his expensive cologne, a scent she had picked out for him years ago. It was Gregory Nash, Richard's longtime business partner, and the one man who had expressed sympathy for her during the divorce, who noticed her first. His eyes widened slightly in recognition and pity. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent warning. But it was too late. Richard followed Gregory's gaze. His eyes landed on her. For a split second, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. Then it was replaced by a slow, cruel dawn of recognition. A smirk, venomous and triumphant, spread across his handsome features. He saw her cheap uniform, the tray in her hand, the exhaustion in her posture, and he saw an opportunity. He deliberately raised his voice, ensuring the entire circle of his sycophantic guests could hear. "Excuse me, waitress," he called out, his tone dripping with theatrical condescension. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear, but she was trapped. Slowly, mechanically, she turned to face him. Her eyes, which once looked at him with love and adoration, were now a flat, guarded gray. "Yes, sir," she managed, her voice a reedy whisper. Richard let out a short, sharp laugh. "I knew you looked familiar. Isabella, darling, look at this. It's my ex-wife, Eleanor." Isabella Thorne, who had been smiling placidly, looked Eleanor up and down with a delicate, dismissive frown. It was the look one might give a piece of furniture that was slightly out of place. "Oh," Isabella said, her voice tinkling like ice in a glass. "How quaint," the guests murmured, their eyes darting between the triumphant CEO and the woman in the server's uniform. The air grew thick with a perverse, voyeuristic tension. Richard stepped closer, invading her personal space. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial growl, but it was still loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Well, well, Eleanor. Looks like you finally found your station in life. You always were better at serving than at anything else. Tell me, do you get to keep the tips?" The words struck her with the physical force of a slap. All the air rushed out of her lungs. He wasn't just insulting her, he was rewriting their history, erasing every sacrifice, every late night she'd spent proofreading his business plans, every ounce of faith she'd poured into him when he was just a man with a laptop and a dream. He was reducing her, their entire shared past, to a punchline. A few of his guests chuckled, eager to curry favor with the man of the hour. The sound was like acid in her ears. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes, hot and shameful. But she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She lifted her chin, her gaze locking with his. For a moment she saw past the billionaire CEO. She saw the insecure boy she had once loved, the one who was now so desperate to bury his past that he had to publicly desecrate it. "Is there anything else I can get for you, Mr. Beaumont?" she asked, her voice impossibly steady. The use of his formal surname was a small act of defiance, a wall she erected between the man he was now and the man she had known. Her composure seemed to infuriate him more than tears would have. His smile tightened. "Yes," he sneered. "There's a small spill over by the harpist. A guest dropped some canapé. Be a dear and clean it up. Use a napkin, not your apron. We're trying to maintain some standards here." He turned his back on her then, dismissing her as he would any other servant. He took Isabella's arm and led her away, his laughter booming once more, leaving Eleanor standing alone in a vortex of silent judgment and second-hand embarrassment. The whispers of the guests were like the hissing of snakes. She didn't look at Gregory Nash, whose face was a mask of shame for his friend's behavior. She didn't look at anyone. With a dignity she didn't know she possessed, she turned and walked toward the harpist. She found the small smear of pâté on the polished marble floor. She knelt, her knees cracking in protest, and wiped it clean with a cocktail napkin. As she stood up, she caught her reflection in the polished surface of a grand piano. She saw a woman on her knees cleaning up a mess at her ex-husband's wedding. She looked broken, humiliated, defeated. But as she stared into her own reflection, the hot tears of shame began to cool into something else. They solidified into a cold, hard resolve. He thought this was her end. He thought he had won, that he had reduced her to ashes. He was wrong. This wasn't an ending. It was a crucible. And from these ashes, someone else was about to be born. She finished her shift, her movements precise and robotic, and walked out of Oakhaven Manor without a single backward glance, the cruel laughter of the wedding guests echoing not as a torment, but as a promise of a reckoning to come. The drive back to her small, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town was a blur. The city lights smeared across her windshield, mingling with the silent tears that now flowed freely. The humiliation from the wedding replayed in her mind on a torturous loop. Richard's sneering face, Isabella's dismissive glance, the sycophantic laughter of the crowd. Each memory was a fresh stab to her heart. She parked her sputtering 10-year-old sedan and trudged up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. The building smelled of old takeout and damp carpets, a stark contrast to the scent of roses and expensive perfume that still clung to her uniform. Inside, she stripped off the hateful polyester dress and let it fall to the floor like a shed skin. She stood under the scalding water of the shower for a long time, scrubbing at her skin as if she could wash away the memory, the shame, the ghost of Richard Beaumont. But he was more than a ghost. He was a phantom limb, an ache in a place where a part of her used to be. Collapsing onto her lumpy sofa, Eleanor allowed herself to finally break. The sobs came in great, ragged waves for the girl she had been and the woman she had become. Her mind drifted back, unbidden, to the beginning. She wasn't always this fragile, this broken. She had been a promising art history PhD candidate at Columbia University, specializing in post-war European art. She had a fire in her, a passion for finding beauty and meaning in the abstract. Then she met Richard Beaumont at a campus coffee shop. He wasn't a CEO then. He was a brilliant, obsessive computer science student with a revolutionary idea for a data streamlining algorithm. He was charming, intense, and utterly convinced he was going to change the world. She fell for the dream as much as she fell for the man. When his student loans ran out, she dropped out of her PhD program, just for a year, they'd said, to work as a paralegal and a waitress to support them. The years stretched into 2, then 5. Her academic ambitions were packed away in a box, gathering dust under their bed. When his parents refused to mortgage their home to give him seed money, Eleanor, without a second thought, sold a small collection of rare first-edition books her grandfather, an avid collector, had left her. The $50,000 from that sale became the initial investment for Beaumont Innovations. She remembered the look on his face, pure, unadulterated gratitude. "I'll pay you back 1,000 times over, Elle," he had whispered, his eyes shining. "We're a team. This is our company." For years, they were a team. She managed the books, handled the HR for their first few employees, and was his sounding board for every decision. She celebrated every small victory and held him through every crushing setback. Her life became a supporting role in the grand production of his success. The success came, slowly at first, and then like a tidal wave. The company went public. The awkward coder from the coffee shop became a tech mogul. The money changed him. The we slowly became I. He started saying, "When I built this company, and my vision," he grew embarrassed by their humble beginnings. He traded their cozy apartment for a sterile penthouse. He swapped their favorite pizza place for exclusive restaurants where she felt perpetually underdressed. He started to see her not as his partner, but as a relic of a past he wanted to forget. She was a reminder of his dependency, of a time when he wasn't the self-made titan he pretended to be. The divorce papers had been the final, brutal severance. He had used the very company she helped build to crush her. Now sitting in her drab apartment, the silence was deafening. The last embers of her hope had been extinguished tonight. Richard had not just moved on. He had danced on the grave of their shared history. Her gaze fell upon a dusty wooden crate in the corner of the room, the one thing she had insisted on keeping from their old life. It wasn't filled with designer clothes or jewelry, but with her old textbooks, research papers, and catalogs from art auctions she used to dream of attending. She knelt and pried open the lid. The smell of old paper and ink filled the air, a scent from a life she barely recognized as her own. On top of a stack of books was a framed photograph. It was of her and her grandfather standing in his library. She was 20, bright-eyed and full of plans. Her grandfather, a kind man with a sharp wit, had a hand on her shoulder. He had been the one who ignited her passion for art, teaching her that true value wasn't always in what was most obvious, but in what was overlooked. "Anyone can see a Rembrandt, Eleanor," he used to say. "The real gift is to see a future masterpiece in a dusty, forgotten canvas." Her fingers traced the glass over his smiling face. A memory surfaced, so vivid it was almost painful. It was from an art auction she had attended with him a year before he passed away. A small, unassuming painting was on the block, attributed to an unknown artist from the Swiss school. The bidding was sluggish. Her grandfather had leaned over and whispered, "Look at the brushwork on the hands. The use of cobalt. That's no student. That's a lost work by Felix Valaton." He had told her about a reclusive, eccentric old investor he knew who was also at the auction, a man who collected artists, not just art, a man named Arthur Hemlock. On a whim, she had approached Mr. Hemlock during an intermission, a nervous student eager to share her observation. He was an imposing man with piercing blue eyes and an air of quiet authority. He had listened to her argument about the painting's provenance with surprising intensity. He'd grilled her with questions, not dismissively, but with genuine curiosity. At the end of their conversation, he had simply nodded. "You have the eye, young lady. Don't ever let anyone persuade you otherwise." Later, he had outbid everyone and acquired the painting for a song. 6 months later, it was authenticated as a genuine Valaton, worth 50 times what he had paid. Eleanor's heart began to beat a little faster. Arthur Hemlock. She hadn't thought of him in years. Was he even still alive? He would be in his late 70s now. He was a legend in the investment world, a true old money titan who operated in the shadows, a stark contrast to Richard's flashy, new money persona. Richard admired and feared men like Hemlock, men whose wealth was so vast and secure they had no need for public validation. A desperate, audacious idea began to form in the ruins of her despair. It was insane. It was a 1 in a million long shot. Mr. Hemlock probably wouldn't even remember her. But what did she have to lose? She had already lost everything else. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her laptop. The screen illuminated her tear-streaked face. She began to type, her fingers flying across the keys. She wasn't searching for jobs anymore. She was researching. She pulled up old articles, investment portfolios, and public records. She found that Hemlock was still very much active, operating through a discreet private equity firm, Hemlock Holdings. He had no public email, no social media, no easy point of contact. He was notoriously private. But Eleanor had spent a decade supporting a tech genius. She knew how to dig. She cross-referenced charity board memberships with university alumni databases. She remembered her grandfather mentioning Hemlock was a benefactor of the New York Historical Society. After 2 hours of relentless searching, she found it. A single obscure email address from an old donor list, linked to his private foundation. Her finger hovered over the compose button. What could she possibly say? "Dear Mr. Hemlock, you met me once over a decade ago. My billionaire ex-husband just humiliated me at his wedding, and I have a crazy idea." No, that was the voice of the victim, the woman Richard had mocked. She had to channel someone else. She had to channel the sharp, passionate PhD candidate he had once admired. She took a deep breath, the cold resolve she'd felt at the wedding returning, stronger this time. She began to write. She didn't mention Richard. She didn't mention her divorce or her financial ruin. She kept it professional, concise, and bold. Subject: a proposition regarding overlooked assets. A follow-up from the Valaton auction. Dear Mr. Hemlock, you may not recall our brief meeting over a decade ago at a Sotheby's auction, where we discussed the potential provenance of a misattributed Swiss school painting. Your subsequent acquisition and its reattribution as a lost Valaton has been a point of academic fascination for me ever since. I am writing to you today because I believe the same principle of identifying undervalued and overlooked assets can be applied more broadly and more profitably to a specific niche in the contemporary art market. The current market is hyper-focused on a handful of brand-name artists, creating a significant bubble while simultaneously ignoring a wealth of extraordinary talent that is critically undervalued. There is a market inefficiency waiting to be exploited. I have developed a comprehensive business proposal for a boutique art consultancy and investment firm. My methodology is based on rigorous academic research, provenance verification, and predictive market analysis, not on fleeting trends. The goal is to curate portfolios of high-growth potential artists before they are discovered by the mainstream, generating exceptional returns for discerning investors. I know your time is invaluable. However, I am confident that my strategy offers a unique and compelling opportunity. I would be grateful for 20 minutes of your time to present my plan. Sincerely, Eleanor Sutton. She read it over a dozen times, her heart pounding. It was audacious. It was presumptuous. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever done. With a shaking hand, she clicked send. The email vanished into the digital void. She closed the laptop and stared into the darkness of her apartment. For the first time since the divorce, she wasn't looking back at the life she had lost. She was taking a single, desperate, defiant step into an unknown future. She had no idea if anyone would answer her call, but in the crushing silence, she had finally found her own voice again. Days turned into a week. The silence from the digital void was deafening. Eleanor continued working for the catering company, each shift a small, grinding humiliation. She served canapés at a pharmaceutical launch and cleared plates at a Sweet 16, all while the memory of Richard's sneer played in the back of her mind. The hope that had flared so brightly after sending the email began to dim, flickering like a dying candle. She started to believe it had all been a foolish, desperate fantasy. Then on a Tuesday morning, an email appeared in her inbox. The sender was listed simply as AH Office. Her breath caught in her throat. The message was brief and devoid of pleasantries. Ms. Sutton, Mr. Hemlock remembers the conversation. He is intrigued by your premise of market inefficiency. Be at 745 Fifth Avenue, 58th floor, tomorrow at 10:01 a.m. sharp. You will have your 20 minutes. Do not be late. Eleanor stared at the screen, her heart doing a frantic drum solo against her ribs. 745 Fifth Avenue. The address was iconic, a skyscraper of granite and glass that housed some of the most powerful hedge funds and private equity firms in the world. This was real. Panic and elation warred within her. She had a business plan, but it was a collection of notes and research on her laptop. She had nothing to wear but her server uniform and a handful of worn-out outfits. The 20 minutes Mr. Hemlock had granted her felt like both a lifetime and a ticking time bomb. For the rest of the day and all through the night, Eleanor worked with a feverish intensity she hadn't felt since her PhD days. Fueled by cheap coffee and pure adrenaline, she refined her research, built financial projection models, and compiled detailed dossiers on 3 undiscovered artists she believed were poised for a breakthrough. She condensed it all into a sleek, professional presentation. This was her one shot, and she would not miss. The next morning, she stood before her cracked wardrobe mirror in despair. Everything she owned looked tired and defeated. Then she remembered a single designer suit she had bought during her Beaumont years for a rare occasion when she needed to represent the company. It was a classic dark gray suit, elegant and timeless. Richard had hated it, calling it too academic. She'd packed it away but never had the heart to throw it out. It was a relic of the woman she was supposed to be. Today it felt like armor. It was a little loose on her now, but it radiated a quiet confidence she desperately needed. She spent her last $40 on a professional blowout for her hair. Stepping into the opulent marble and mahogany lobby of 745 Fifth Avenue, she felt a flicker of the old insecurity, but she pushed it down, straightened her shoulders, and walked to the elevator bank with purpose. On the 58th floor, the doors opened to a silent, minimalist reception area. The name on the wall was simply Hemlock. No holdings, no ink. Just the name, etched in understated steel. It was a statement of pure, unadulterated power. A severe-looking assistant led her down a long hallway lined with museum-quality art. Eleanor recognized a small Giacometti sculpture and what looked like an early Rothko. It was a private gallery disguised as a corridor. Finally, they reached a pair of large oak doors. The assistant opened one and announced, "Ms. Sutton." Arthur Hemlock was not sitting behind a large, imposing desk. The office was more like a library, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, comfortable leather armchairs, and a large window offering a breathtaking view of Central Park. He was standing by the window, a man in his late 70s, looking just as imposing as she remembered, but with an air of profound stillness. He turned, his piercing blue eyes appraising her from head to toe. "Ms. Sutton," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you look different from the catering staff at the Beaumont wedding." Eleanor froze. He knew. Of course he knew. A man like Arthur Hemlock knew everything. The carefully constructed professional facade she had built threatened to crumble. He saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. "I have a small stake in the company that owns the Oakhaven Manor," he explained. a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. I receive reports. The incident was noted. It was vulgar. He gestured to one of the armchairs. Sit. Your 20 minutes started when you stepped out of the elevator. His directness, while startling, was also liberating. The pretense was gone. He knew her circumstances. Now all that mattered was the substance of her proposal. Eleanor took a steadying breath and began. She didn't plead or offer a sob story. She spoke with the passion and precision of the academic she once was. She laid out her thesis. The art world's celebrity culture had created a bubble, and like all bubbles, it was destined to pop. The real sustainable value, she argued, lay in artists with true technical skill and a unique voice who were being ignored by the mainstream galleries who chased trends. She presented her three target artists: a hyper-realistic sculptor from Portugal working with recycled materials, a German painter who used forgotten Renaissance glazing techniques to create unsettling modern portraits, and a young indigenous American photographer whose work explored themes of identity and landscape. For each, she had a complete dossier: their history, their technique, their small but growing critical acclaim, and her financial projections for their work's value over the next 5 and 10 years. She spoke for exactly 19 minutes. When she finished, the room was silent. Arthur Hemlock stared at her, his expression unreadable. He steepled his fingers, his gaze intense. "You're proposing a fund," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I'm proposing a boutique firm," she corrected gently. "Sutton Curations. A fund implies a broad, diversified portfolio. I'm advocating for a surgical, curated approach. We don't just buy art, we cultivate artists. We provide them with resources, connect them with critics, and strategically place their work to build their reputation. We invest in the creator as much as the creation. It yields a higher return and builds a more stable asset." Hemlock was silent for another long moment. Then he stood up and walked to a large, antique globe in the corner of the room. He gave it a slow spin. "Your ex-husband," he said, his back to her, "is a peacock. He built a company on a single brilliant idea, and now he spends all his time preening his feathers, convinced of his own genius. He buys art that screams, 'I am rich.' Loud, obvious pieces by artists everyone has heard of. It's not investment, it's decoration. A validation of his ego." He turned back to face her. You have the eye, just as you did a decade ago. You see the substance behind the style. You see the volatin in the dusty frame." He walked over to his desk, picked up a pen, and scrawled a figure on a notepad. He turned it around for her to see. $10,000. Eleanor's breath hitched. She couldn't speak. "That's your seed capital," Hemlock said calmly. "Hemlock Holdings will be a silent majority partner, 70% equity. You will be the managing director with full operational autonomy and a 30% stake that vests over 4 years. You will take a respectable but not extravagant salary. The profits, however, we will share according to our equity. I will provide the capital and the connections. You will provide the eye and the work ethic. Is that agreeable?" Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, but these were not tears of shame or sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming, shocking gratitude. She could only nod, unable to form words. "Good," Hemlock said, already moving on. "My legal team will have the paperwork drawn up by the end of the day. You'll have an office in this building by Monday. Hire an assistant. Start with the Portuguese sculptor. I like his use of industrial decay. It's a commentary on late-stage capitalism. It will sell." He walked her to the door. As she was about to leave, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "One more thing, Miss Sutton," he said, his voice softer now. "Revenge is a vulgar motivation. It's a dish best served, as they say, cold. But I have found in my life that overwhelming, undeniable success is a far more satisfying repast. Don't do this to spite Richard Beaumont. Do this for the brilliant woman he was too foolish to see." The months that followed were a blur of relentless work. Eleanor moved into a small but sleek office on the 40th floor. She hired a sharp, young art history graduate as her assistant. She flew to Lisbon, Berlin, and Montana, meeting with the artists she had identified. She wasn't the tentative, beaten-down woman from the wedding anymore. She was Ms. Sutton, the founder of Sutton Curations, a woman with a $10 million war chest and the silent backing of a financial legend. She was shrewd, empathetic, and utterly tireless. She negotiated with a steely resolve that surprised even herself. She pored over contracts, arranged studio visits for influential critics, and used Hemlock's network to place key pieces in important collections, creating a buzz in the art world's inner circles. The transformation was profound. She started dressing the part, not in flashy clothes like Isabella, but in elegant, powerful pieces that mirrored her newfound confidence. The shadows under her eyes were replaced by a determined gleam. She was no longer a supporting character in someone else's story. She was the author of her own. 6 months after her meeting with Hemlock, Sutton Curations made its first major splash. Eleanor brokered a private sale of a single sculpture by her Portuguese artist to a renowned Swiss museum for $1.2 million. A piece she had acquired for the firm for just $80,000. The art journals and financial papers took notice. Mysterious new firm, Sutton Curations, redefining art investment. One headline read. Eleanor allowed herself a small private smile. She was no longer a ghost. She was a player, and she was just getting started. Richard Beaumont had no idea that the woman he had tried to erase was now quietly building an empire in his own backyard, piece by valuable piece. A year to the day after Richard's wedding, the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was alight with the incandescent glow of power and prestige. It was the annual Patrons of the Arts Gala, the most exclusive event on the New York City social calendar. It was a place to see and be seen, a hunting ground for deals and a showcase for dominance. Richard Beaumont was in his element. He stood near the Temple of Dender, a glass of vintage champagne in his hand, holding court. Isabella, draped in a glittering couture gown, was a perfect accessory on his arm. Beaumont Innovations had just posted another record-breaking quarter, and Richard was soaking in the adulation. He was a major sponsor of the gala. His company's logo projected discreetly onto the ancient temple walls. The AI integration is seamless, a complete paradigm shift, he was saying to a fawning tech journalist. We're not just ahead of the curve, we are the curve. His partner, Gregory Nash, stood slightly apart from the group, nursing a whiskey. Gregory had watched Richard's ego inflate over the past year to terrifying proportions. He had tried to caution him about over-leveraging the company on a risky new venture, but Richard had dismissed his concerns with a wave of his hand. You need to think bigger, Greg. Scared money don't make money. The atmosphere in the ballroom began to shift. A new current of excitement, a fresh wave of whispers, was rippling through the crowd. The talk wasn't about tech or stocks. It was about art. They say the deal was north of $50 million. A woman in diamonds whispered behind her fan. For a single collection, can you imagine? An artist no one had even heard of 18 months ago. Another voice hissed. The firm behind it is called Sutton Curations, run by some wonderkin. Apparently, she has the Midas touch. Richard overheard the chatter and scoffed. Sutton Curations, he said to Gregory with a dismissive smirk. Sounds like a company that sells throw pillows. Probably another flash in the pan funded by Daddy's money. Gregory, however, looked uneasy. He had been hearing that name for months in serious financial circles. It wasn't a flash in the pan. It was a silent, lethal predator. I wouldn't be so sure, Rich, he muttered. They say the principal is brilliant, has the backing of Arthur Hemlock. Richard's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. The name Hemlock always commanded respect, even from him. But the name Sutton still registered as nothing more than a common surname, a ghost he had long since banished. The gala's host, the director of the museum, tapped the microphone on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention. A hush fell over the room. Tonight, the director began, his voice resonant with excitement, we celebrate not only the timeless beauty that surrounds us, but also the visionaries who ensure that art continues to thrive. This year, the museum has made its most significant acquisition of contemporary art in a decade. A groundbreaking collection by the photographer James Blackwood, whose work brilliantly recontextualizes the American landscape. He paused for dramatic effect. This acquisition, valued at over $60 million, was made possible through an extraordinary partnership. The visionary who discovered Mr. Blackwood, who nurtured his talent, and who brokered this landmark deal has, in less than 2 years, reshaped the landscape of art investment. She has proven that substance can triumph over speculation and that true genius is timeless. Richard shifted impatiently, bored by the speech. He wanted the focus back on him, the titan of tech. Isabella was busy scanning the crowd for rival socialites. "Ladies and gentlemen," the director boomed, "it is my profound honor to introduce the founder and managing director of Sutton Curations, the brilliant mind behind this historic acquisition. Please welcome Ms. Eleanor Sutton." The name hit the air like a sonic boom. Richard froze mid-sip, the champagne flute trembling in his hand. Sutton? Eleanor Sutton? It couldn't be. A wave of cold dread washed over him. He turned his head toward the stage, his mind refusing to process what his ears had just heard. And then he saw her. Walking out from the wings was not the broken, mousy-haired woman in a cheap polyester uniform he had mocked. The woman on the stage was a queen. Eleanor moved with a serene, unshakable confidence. She was wearing a bespoke gown of deep emerald silk that clung to her frame, accentuating a strength and grace he had never seen in her. Her hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and a simple but stunning pair of diamond earrings, a personal gift from Arthur Hemlock, were her only adornment. She wasn't just beautiful, she was formidable. Her presence commanded the entire room. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Hundreds of eyes darted from the luminous woman on the stage to the ashen-faced CEO standing by the temple. They remembered. Everyone who had been at the wedding, who had heard the cruel jokes and witnessed the humiliation, remembered. The connection was made in an instant, a silent, shocking thunderclap of realization. Isabella's perfectly made-up face was a mask of disbelief. Her hand, which had been resting on Richard's arm, fell away as if she'd been burned. Gregory Nash simply stared, a slow smile of pure, unadulterated admiration spreading across his face. Eleanor stepped up to the podium, her calm gaze sweeping over the sea of stunned faces. Her eyes met Richard's for a fleeting, electrifying moment. There was no hatred in her gaze, no anger. There was nothing. It was the cool, dispassionate look of a victor, and it was more terrifying than any curse. The flash bulbs of the press, which had been aimed at Richard all evening, now swiveled and exploded in a volley of light, all directed at her. In that moment, Richard Beaumont, the king of his own universe, became a background character. He was eclipsed, utterly and completely, by the ghost he thought he had destroyed. The world had not just forgotten him, it had tilted on its axis, and Eleanor was now the sun. The shock was so profound, so absolute, that all he could do was stand there, his world crumbling in the blinding glare of her triumph. Eleanor stood at the podium, bathed in the warm stage lights and the storm of camera flashes. The silence in the grand hall was absolute, thick with astonishment. She looked out at the assembly of the city's most powerful people, her gaze calm and her posture radiating a quiet power that no amount of money could buy. "Thank you, Director," she began, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. It was the same voice that had whispered encouragement to Richard in their tiny apartment, but now it held a new resonance, a new authority. "It is an honor to be here, in this temple of human creativity." She did not look at Richard. She didn't have to. Every word she spoke was aimed at him like a precisely calibrated missile. "The philosophy behind Sutton Curations is simple," she continued. "We believe in the enduring power of substance. In a world that is increasingly loud, distracted, and obsessed with fleeting trends, we seek out what is real, what is lasting. We look for the value that others have overlooked, the beauty that has been discarded, the genius that has been silenced." A murmur went through the crowd. The subtext was as clear as the diamonds on Isabella's neck. They all knew the story now. The humiliated maid, the triumphant queen. "James Blackwood's work is a testament to this philosophy," she said, gesturing toward a large screen where one of his haunting photographs was now displayed. He saw majesty in forgotten landscapes, the very places our society is quick to pave over and forget. He reminded us that there is profound strength to be found in what was left behind, It is often in the quiet, overlooked corners that true worth resides, waiting for someone with the patience and the vision to recognize it. She gave a small, elegant smile. Our success is not a mystery. It is the result of looking where no one else is looking. It is about believing in potential when others only see failure. It's about having the courage to invest in a second act. Thank you. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The speech was a masterclass in grace and power, a public undressing of Richard Beaumont's character without ever mentioning his name. The applause was thunderous, a genuine rolling ovation that shook the hall. It wasn't just for the deal, it was for her resilience, for her spectacular, unbelievable comeback. As Eleanor walked off the stage, she was immediately surrounded by a throng of admirers, collectors, and investors, all clamoring for a moment of her time. Richard stood frozen, a statue of impotent fury. Isabella stared at him, her eyes wide with a dawning horror and contempt. She was a woman who prized image and power above all else, and she was realizing, in this very public moment, that she had married a fraud, a man whose strength was a hollow facade. It was Gregory Nash who moved first. He bypassed his partner completely, making a beeline for Eleanor. He had to wait his turn, but when he finally got to her, his face was alight with respect. "Eleanor," he said, his voice full of genuine awe. That was incredible. I've never seen anything like it." "Thank you, Gregory," she replied, her smile warm but professional. "It's been a busy year." "I'll say," he chuckled, then his expression turned serious. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, Eleanor, there's something you should know. What you're doing here, it's more than just a personal victory." She looked at him, puzzled. "Beaumont Innovations," Gregory said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's in trouble. Richard has been pouring capital into a high-risk, high-leverage AI project, the one he was bragging about earlier. It's a vanity project, and it's draining the company dry. The technology is unstable, and the board is getting terrified. We're facing a potential hostile takeover." Eleanor's carefully maintained composure didn't slip, but her eyes sharpened. Gregory took a deep breath before delivering the final blow. "The primary investment group leading the quiet acquisition of our stock, the ones positioning for the takeover, they're operating through a holding company." He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "It's Hemlock Holdings." The world seemed to slow down. The noise of the gala faded into a distant hum. Arthur Hemlock hadn't just funded her comeback. He had been playing a much larger, longer game. "And there's more," Gregory continued, his eyes wide. "The rumor on the street is that Hemlock has given proxy control of his entire voting bloc in Beaumont Innovations to a new, trusted advisor." Eleanor's mind raced, connecting the dots with dizzying speed. The board meetings Hemlock had invited her to sit in on, the financial reports for Beaumont Innovations he had asked her to analyze under the guise of market research. It wasn't just training, it was preparation. She was now one of the largest, most powerful stakeholders in her ex-husband's company. She held his fate in her hands. Just then, the crowd around her parted. Richard Beaumont stormed toward her, his face a mottled mask of rage and disbelief. His polished veneer had been stripped away, revealing the raw, insecure man beneath. Isabella was nowhere in sight. She had already abandoned the sinking ship. "You!" he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "How did you do this? That old man! Hemlock, what did you do?" Eleanor faced him, no longer the trembling server, but his equal, and perhaps his superior. "Hello, Richard," she said, her voice chillingly calm. "This is my night, my event," he sputtered, gesturing wildly. "You think you can just walk in here and—" "Your event?" Eleanor interrupted, her voice cutting through his tirade like glass. "This is a celebration of art and vision, Richard, something you've never understood. You don't buy art, you buy trophies. Just like you don't build partners, you acquire assets. And when they no longer serve to inflate your ego, you discard them." His face went pale. "This was never about revenge," she said, echoing Hemlock's words. "This is about business, and as a significant shareholder in Beaumont Innovations, I've reviewed your recent performance. Your paradigm shift AI project is a catastrophic cash burn with no viable path to profitability. You've risked a stable, profitable company on a gamble to satisfy your own vanity. The board is concerned. The word shareholder landed like a physical blow. He stared at her, the blood draining from his face as the horrific implications dawned on him. The board meeting is tomorrow at 9 a.m., Eleanor stated, her voice devoid of all emotion. Your resignation will be the first item on the agenda. It will be accepted. Gregory will be appointed interim CEO. He actually understands the meaning of fiduciary duty. Richard looked from Eleanor's cold, determined face to Gregory's grimly resolved one. He was cornered, outmaneuvered, and utterly defeated. The architect of her public humiliation was now facing his own, far more permanent ruin, delivered by her hand. "You can't," he whispered, the last of his bluster gone, replaced by a pathetic plea. "Eleanor, please, everything I built." "You mean everything we built," she corrected him softly for the last time. "And now I'm simply protecting my original investment." She held his gaze for a final moment, then turned without another word and walked away, rejoining the circle of admirers who were waiting for her. She didn't look back. Richard Beaumont was left standing alone in the middle of the grand hall, a relic in his own museum of success. The flashes of the cameras, the whispers of the crowd, the projection of his company's logo on the ancient stone walls, it was all for nothing. He had tried to mock his ex-wife as a maid, and in return, she had calmly and quietly taken his entire kingdom. In the end, Eleanor's story became a legend whispered in boardrooms and galleries across the city. It wasn't just a tale of revenge, it was a powerful testament to resilience, integrity, and the quiet, unyielding strength of a woman who refused to be defined by the man who tried to break her. She never sought to destroy Richard for the sake of vengeance. Instead, she focused on building herself, and in doing so, she created a success so total and undeniable that his world simply couldn't exist in the same orbit. She continued to lead Sutton Curations to staggering new heights, becoming one of the most respected names in the art world, forever proving that the greatest masterpiece she ever curated was her own life. What did you think of Eleanor's incredible journey? Was her final move the perfect checkmate? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were inspired by her story of triumph over betrayal, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories.